Yes, the second wave of COVID-19 is here and we're all learning how to deal with it. We said 2020 is the lost year, but 2021 seems to be following suit. However, there is a silver lining. The year began with the high tides in COVID-19 vaccination development, production, and the distribution, and I hope you got vaccinated. And 2021 also marks the 100-year anniversary of the discovery of insulin. Back in 1921, insulin was discovered by Sir Frederick G. Banting and two other scientists at the University of Toronto. To truly understand the impact of this discovery, imagine that before 1921, it was near miracle for people with type 1 diabetes to live more than a year or two. Insulin is, without a doubt, one of the greatest medical discoveries of the 20th century. And it's still the only effective treatment for people with type 1 diabetes. On discovery, the scientists collectively sold the patent for insulin to the University of Toronto. They believed that a life-saving drug such as insulin should not be capitalized for the profit of a few. Fast forward 100 years later, and today insulin is one of the most expensive pharmaceutical drugs. And that is the paradox we're going to unwrap this week. The business of a now patent-free, life-saving drug. Welcome back to Global Healthcare Archives. In this episode, we're going to break down the business of insulin and the industry of the most prevalent disease in the modern world, diabetes. Though it might seem strange that we are addressing insulin and not the disease at large, there's a very good reason for it. Did you know 3 of the largest pharma companies in the world, Novo Nordisk, Sanofi Aventis, and Eli Lilly, enjoy a near monopoly in the manufacturing of insulin? In fact, this cartel is so strong that in most countries, only 1 or 2 of these manufacturers sell their insulin. Usually, patents are issued for 20 years, and by that logic, should the patent for insulin have expired by now? And therefore, should more pharma companies be manufacturing insulin and collectively bringing the prices down? Well, here's where the matters get a little more complex. While there are alternatives to the brand products in India and China, the cartel keeps the prices high by evergreening their patents. Evergreening in the pharma industry is the process of piling on additional patents by making minor reformulations without necessarily increasing the drug's therapeutic efficacy. Therefore, pushing the expiry date of the original patent with each such revision. For example, Sanofi has filed more than 74 patents for Lantus alone, to ensure a competition-free monopoly for at least another 40 years. The other reason for the high cost of the insulin drug is that it's a biologic substance. That is, it is a therapeutic biological product. So it's not like other drugs that are formulated around a molecule. Creating a biosimilar for insulin is as complex and expensive as creating the original drug itself. Add to this the requirement for fresh approvals, clearances, and trials. Most companies that deal in generics find this process too expensive and too time-consuming. And that's just the beginning of the hurdles. If a company does develop an insulin biosimilar and it's ready to launch it in a market where the big 3 are active, they may be pushed for a pay-for-delay scheme. Here, the incumbents will file a series of lawsuits to keep the new entrant away from the market, and eventually even pay the new entrant a fixed fee annually for not entering the market at all. So what's the impact of all of this control and monopoly? The US accounts for only 15% of the global insulin consumption, but contributes a whopping 50% of the global insulin revenue. In 2001, Lantus used to cost about $35 and now costs $340 for the same 10 ml vial. Traditionally, as products mature, companies tend to reduce prices, but in the case of Sanofi, it increased the price by 1,000%. Let that sink in, 1,000%. And this is not just Sanofi at play. As per data from Business Insider, all competing brands have consistently increased their prices too. Since healthcare in the US is largely driven by private insurance, insurers use the pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, to negotiate prices with manufacturers. The manufacturers increase the price of insulin before offering at a deal or discount to the PBMs. This inflated pricing is what patients without insurance have to pay, making it really unaffordable. And as a consequence of this, 25% of the 30 million Americans living with diabetes skip their doses or end up skimming on it. Across the ocean, the problem is quite different in India. Building on the previous example, Lantus costs about 500 rupees for a 10 ml vial. That's approximately about $7, which when compared to the $340 in the US market, it's almost dirt cheap. But in India, additional factors come into play for affordability. At one of the lowest per capita incomes among emerging nations, an average diabetic patient in India is unable to afford even this highly reduced cost of the drug. An average type 2 diabetic patient would end up spending almost 2 years of his or her total household income on the drug across a 5-year period. Throwing in increasing complications due to incorrect diagnosis, increasing diabetic complications, lack of proper nutrition, doctor consultations, etc. And very soon, the whole family is in a debt trap because of this one diabetic. So why doesn't the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority, India's drug price regulatory agency, do anything about it? In 2013, the NPPA wanted to fix the price for the insulin manufactured by Eli Lilly, seeking the details of the actual cost of production of the drug. Eli Lilly in return approached the court claiming that the landing cost of the medicine must be considered, allowing it to charge up to 50% above the cost price. The court asked NPPA to revisit the prices of imported insulins. Now, with the scenario of imported insulins being as it is, what are some of the other solutions? Remember we spoke about biosimilars earlier? Biosimilars do provide an opportunity to reduce the cost of insulin, and India actually has several companies such as Biocon and Wockhardt who are actively manufacturing biosimilars, priced at a considerably lower rate. Despite this, biosimilars in India make a minuscule amount of the total market share. We asked one of India's top endocrinologists, Dr. Ravi Shankar, about his views on biosimilars being an effective alternative to analog insulin. We posed the same question to a doctor working in the endocrinology department of a government medical college in Andhra Pradesh. He had a slightly different view.
Both biosimilars and analog insulins are not affordable to a large chunk of Indian lower socio-economic class. In these patients, human insulin has to be used and the dose adjusted to minimize the risk of complications such as severe hypoglycemia.
These two opposing views exhibit the many parameters that must be considered when prescribing the type of insulin. Maybe the answer to the business of insulin lies elsewhere. How has Europe been handling this? In Germany, UK and Italy, insulin can be obtained at a negligible amount, sometimes cheaper than over-the-counter drugs such as ibuprofen. So let's understand how Germany makes insulin so affordable. The German government, similar to Italy and the UK, actively negotiates prescription drug prices, thus keeping a check on consumer costs. Most of the citizens are covered by public insurance plans administered through tightly regulated non-profit insurance companies, overcoming the problems with PBMs. When a new drug is introduced in Germany, an independent panel evaluates its treatment value and efficacy against the proposed drug price. Drugs serving similar purpose get grouped together, thus circumventing the trade name or brand name issue. Germany promotes reference pricing, where the panel sets a maximum price for that particular drug. While this privilege comes at a cost, with Germans paying nearly 1/3 of their income to tax, the benefits are generous in return. Second only to cardiovascular disease, diabetes is the leading cause of death by a disease the world over. A disease that is both preventable and controllable in the case of type 2 diabetes, and in the case of type 1, manageable by this magic drug, insulin. And yet global manufacturing of this drug is held hostage by a handful of pharma giants. So where then lies the solution? Unlike cancer, diabetes has a working solution, and it is still inaccessible to the average individual. And that is why, beyond the pathophysiology of diabetes, the very business of insulin must be addressed for progress to happen. And while you ponder on that, I look forward to seeing you all next week again.